Welcome to the Economist in Your Ear podcast. Australia, well, it spent over a decade riding this huge commodity wave, all thanks to China's incredible growth, didn't it? Became one of the wealthiest places on Earth per person.
Absolutely phenomenal growth, yeah.
But now Beijing's deliberately hitting the brakes on its property and infrastructure engine. So the big question for you, listen, for everyone in Canberra and Sydney, really, is it stark? Is Australia facing some kind of inevitable, painful economic bust? Now its biggest customer is slowing right down.
Or is it maybe something else?
Or, is this just a necessary, maybe overdue reset for a domestic economy that, let's be honest, might have gotten a bit complacent during the good times?
That framing bust versus reset, that's really the heart of the whole economic debate right now, isn't it? You hear this narrative all the time that Australia's got this massive post-China hangover.
Right.
So our mission today, I suppose, is to look hard at the evidence. We need to acknowledge the real structural pain points that make up that hangover. But also maybe push back a bit where that story feels too simple and ask what crucial domestic failures, often get left out of the conversation.
Okay, let's start with that core diagnosis then, because the China shock, that's definitely real. You just can't separate the last, 15 years of Australian prosperity from demand coming out of China?
No, the dependence is still kind of staggering when you look at the numbers. We're talking roughly a third, maybe even nudging up towards 40% of Australia's total export earnings still tied directly or indirectly to Chinese demand.
Wow, still that high.
Yeah. And when the biggest, hungriest buyer of iron ore, which Australia ships out in, mountains, when that buyer slows down, it just hits the national account straight away. It's immediate.
And you can definitely see that hit in the trade figures, the budget forecasts. Commodity prices are, softening pretty dramatically. Iron ore, the big one, it slumped, about 25% just this year?
Yep, year to date. And that flows right through to Canberra's revenue forecast, puts the squeeze on the states.
Yeah.
What's also interesting, I think, is how that big macro shift translates almost instantly into volatility on the ground commercially. We saw that friction recently between huge players like BHP and Beijing's sort of central buying agency, the CMRG.
Yes, the China Mineral Resources Group.
That spat. It briefly rattled global shipping rates. It just shows how a tactical commercial move in Beijing can send ripples through Australian ports almost overnight. Volatility is the new normal now, not some kind of exception.
But if we step back from the immediate commodity price swings and connect that external shock to what's happening at home, the real drag, the core macro problem, it isn't just about fluctuating prices, is it? It seems to be this deep lack of productive capacity here. That feels like the real hangover.
That's hit the nail on the head. That's the critical vulnerability. It really shows how the external boom kind of masks some internal weaknesses, maybe some rot. Look, Australia is now ranked second last in the entire OECD for productivity growth since 2019.
Second last. Who's behind them?
Only Mexico. Their labor productivity, basically output per hour worked, it's averaged a really sluggish, maybe 0.6%, 0.7% per year since the pandemic hit.
That's incredibly low.
It is. And even if global demand is strong, if your output per hour just isn't really moving, that puts the hard limit on how much wages and living standards can actually improve.
And the average Australian household is really feeling that limit, that ceiling, aren't they? We've seen the data showing real disposable income per person. It actually fell the most among all OECD countries between 2022 and 2024.
Fell the most, yeah. And that drop is made worse by weak real wage growth, plus this thing economists call bracket creep.
Where inflation pushes you into higher tax brackets, even if you're not actually earning more in real terms.
Exactly. So people just feel poorer, much poorer. And it makes that external commodities slowdown feel like a proper recession, even if the headline unemployment number still looks okay, relatively speaking.
So, the China slowdown is the trigger, maybe, but the underlying vulnerability is really domestic, this failure, perhaps, to use the boom years to get more efficient.
Precisely.
Now, that phrase, post-China hangover, it sounds very focused on goods, on resources, like the whole economy is just tumbling into a resource bust. But when you dig into it, there seems to be quite a lot of change, maybe even diversification, happening within the resource sector itself. We should probably challenge that simple bust idea.
Oh, absolutely. We really need to. The export mix isn't just, iron ore and coal, full stop. Look at gold exports, for instance. They're actually set to overtake both LNG and metallurgical coal in value.
Really? Gold?
Yeah. So while iron ore is still huge, obviously it doesn't mean the whole mining sector is just collapsing in unison.
Sure.
It's shifting.
And then there's the whole strategic demand, longer term, for critical minerals, lithium, nickel, rare earths, that surely provides some kind of structural cushion.
Right.
Okay, prices for some might be weak right now, cyclically.
Right, they are volatile.
But the whole geopolitical push, the energy transition, that points to a massive shift towards a new kind of resource boom, isn't it? It's not a collapse back to the 90s. It feels more like a difficult transition period.
That difference is absolutely critical. But, and this is a big but, this shift needs a policy response. If Australia wants to move from just digging up rocks and shipping them out to sending, say, battery-grade materials or processed minerals...
Adding value onshore.
Exactly. They have got to dramatically speed up the approvals for that onshore processing, for that value-add activity. If that policy stuff doesn't keep up, well, then they just stay vulnerable to those raw commodity price swings.
And moving beyond mining for a second, that whole narrative seems to have this huge blind spot. Services. All the worry is about the iron ore price, but services exports seem to be growing much faster than you could possibly build a new mine.
That's a really major omission in the usual story. Look at education, tourism exports to China. They've already bounced back quite strongly. Education is back to, around 90% of 2019 levels?
That's significant recovery.
It is. But crucially, the bigger long-term growth story isn't just China anymore. Growth right across Asia, especially India, Southeast Asia. These are markets that can potentially scale even faster. Australia has real expertise in things like professional services, finance, education. They need to be pushing hard into ASEAN nations.
So instead of just pinning hopes on the next megamine approval, maybe focus more on leveraging that expertise across the whole region.
That's the opportunity. But again, like with resources, this growth hits domestic constraints. Services export growth depends massively on Australia's own internal settings, doesn't it? Things like predictable visa rules, sensible student caps maybe, and the elephant in the room, housing supply for international students. If students can't find anywhere decent or affordable to live, or if the visa system seems too unpredictable...
then that engine just stalls out.
Exactly, it stalls.
Okay, and there's a third point of nuance, isn't there? Something that stops this being a straight repeat of, say, a 1990s-style bust. And that's the currency, the Aussie dollar. It acts like a big shock absorber.
Oh, it's essential context, hugely important. When the terms of trade slide, which is basically... the ratio of export prices to import prices, a weaker Australian dollar helps cushion domestic employment.
How does it do that exactly?
Well, it makes the non-resource exporters, think tourism or education again, or advanced manufacturing, more competitive internationally. Their prices look cheaper overseas. And it also helps local businesses that compete against imports because imports become more expensive.
Oh, right. So instead of all the pain hitting just the resource states, leading to huge job losses there, the weaker dollar kind of spreads the adjustment more widely across the economy.
Yeah, it helps prevent the bust being quite as sharp and concentrated as maybe it was in past cycles where employment just took a massive dive in certain regions. The currency helps the whole tradable sector absorb that external shock.
Which, maybe paradoxically, might let Canberra be a little bit slower in fixing the structural issues that the low productivity really exposes.
Well, that's the risk, isn't it? That the shock absorber allows a bit of complacency on the deeper reforms.
Which leads us nicely into those domestic issues. So things that are actually driving that weak productivity we talked about. We hear a lot from business groups complaining that high corporate taxes are the main problem holding back investment.
Yeah, you hear that a lot. And look, the facts are the facts. Australia's effective corporate rate is around 28.5%. The OECD average is closer to 22%, so it is higher.
A bit higher.
It is. But, and this is where we need nuance, I think you've got to argue that this high headline rate is probably more a symptom than the actual disease that's causing the investment drought.
How so? I mean, isn't that a clear competitive disadvantage? 7 points above average? Surely cutting the rate is low-hanging fruit?
Well, maybe be. But think about it. Do companies really make huge multi-billion-dollar investment decisions based purely on the last couple of percentage points of tax when the basic operational risks are just so high?
What kind of risks are we talking about?
The real blockers, especially for big new energy projects or technology investments, seem to be operational. We're talking about incredibly slow planning approvals, grid connection delays that can literally last for years.
Years. Wow.
Yeah, unpredictable energy costs, major skill shortages that mean you can't even get the workers to start the project. These are the killers.
So if your clean energy project takes, say, 5 years longer than planned because you can't get permits or hook up to the grid, knocking a couple of points off the tax rate doesn't really fix the fundamental problem, which is time and uncertainty killing your returns.
Exactly right. That's why some analysts argue the better solution isn't just a blunt rate cut, which helps everyone, whether they invest or not, but something more targeted, like a clean investment allowance.
Oh, that too.
It'd be a system that specifically rewards companies for actual capital expenditure, for R&D. It would be a smarter way, arguably, to channel support towards firms that actually do expand productive capacity and innovate. Focus the benefit.
Okay, that makes sense. We also really need to shift how we think about the housing crisis. Everyone talks about it as cost of living, social justice, which it absolutely is. But the sources frame it as a critical productivity constraint.
And that is absolutely the correct economic lens to view it through as well. The numbers are just, well, shocking. Australia has fewer homes per 1,000 people than most other rich countries. Rents are up nearly 50% in a decade.
50%.
And people with mortgages are spending, on average, half 50% of their disposable income just on repayments. I mean, that's a crisis on a human level, obviously, but it's profoundly damaging economically, too.
Why is it a productivity killer, though, beyond the awful human cost?
Because if your skilled workers, whether they're migrants you're trying to attract or even your own unit graduates, if they can't afford to live anywhere near the major job centers, you know, where the jobs in those new critical minerals processing plants are, or in finance or specialized tech services, then firms just can't hire the talent they need. They underinvest because the labor pool is constrained. Housing affordability, or the lack of it, basically limits talent mobility and stops firms expanding where the growth actually needs to happen. It's a huge drag.
So the quick wins for government here aren't really about more subsidies, but about getting building going, fixing the supply side and planning.
Absolutely. The fastest wins are about tackling those local council vetoes, the bureaucratic delays, specific policies, things like implementing what they call by right upzoning near train stations and bus routes. Meaning standard, say, mid-rise apartment buildings get approved automatically by right without needing years of localized appeals and arguments. That needs to be linked to national housing targets that actually have some teeth, some enforcement behind them.
That sounds like lots of small, fiddly changes, doesn't it? Which brings us to the playbook for this whole reset. The Productivity Commission had that great movie analogy for the strategy needed.
They did, yeah. It was quite neat. They basically said, look, there's no single grand Oppenheimer-style Big Bang reform coming. No massive tax overhaul or labor market shakeup is going to suddenly lift productivity back to where it needs to be.
Okay, so no silver bullet.
No. Instead, they said the country needs dozens of smaller, targeted changes, all happening at once, kind of like that movie Everything, Everywhere, All at Once, EEAAO.
Right, micro reforms, but executed with macro-level intensity. Okay, so what are the quick wins then? The things that could happen in the next, say, 12 to 18 months to tackle those bottlenecks we just discussed?
Execution and incentives, that's the key. First, hit permitting hard. Maybe publish a quarterly time-to-permit dashboard for energy projects, critical minerals processing. Make the delays transparent. Make agencies accountable.
Okay, transparency. What else?
Second, that housing accord needs teeth, maybe version 2.0, that mandates default by-right mid-rise housing within, say, 800 meters of major public transport stops. Get density built where the jobs are growing.
And what about the skills shortages?
Targeted skills visas. Maybe make them portable so they're tied to the occupation, not just one employer. And critically, link this directly to a proper national housing plan for students so we don't cripple our universities because there's nowhere for international students to live. You've got to connect the skills coming in directly to productivity needs.
Okay, those are the quick fixes. What about the slightly longer game? The structural moves over the next, say, 2 to 4 years?
That's where really scaling up that services engine comes in.
Yeah.
Things like simplifying the rules around student work rights, rebuilding a premium tourism strategy focused on Asia, especially going after professional service deals in high-growth places like India and ASEAN.
And energy.
And energy requires what you might call grid realism. Yes, speed up the connections for renewables, absolutely essential. But you also probably need to secure transitional gas supplies for key industrial sectors, think steel, chemicals, to stop them just shutting down or leaving while the clean energy system is built out. Avoid unintentional deindustrialization.
That sounds like an incredibly difficult balancing act, decarbonize, without destroying industry in the process.
It is. And manufacturers are warning very loudly if they lose reliable, affordable energy now, those industries might just pack up and leave for places like the US or Canada, and they probably won't come back.
Okay, so let's try and pull this together. The bottom line seems to be Australia isn't really post-China in the sense of being disconnected, but it is definitely post-easy mode. The easy money from just shipping raw commodities, well, that's largely gone, or at least much less reliable.
Exactly. The global buyer is much choppier, more demanding, and the fix isn't about somehow wishing China goes back to its old ways. It's got to be operational and it's got to be domestic.
So this isn't really a bust. It's more of a necessary, maybe quite painful reset.
I think that's the right way to frame it. And the core jobs are clear. Faster permits for investment, building more homes, designing smarter incentives for capital spending, and really getting serious about scaling up services exports to the rest of Asia. That's the everything, everywhere, all at once playbook they need to run.
But, and this is the final thought maybe, given how incredibly resistant Australian politics seems to have been to big economic reforms over the last 15 years, think about the mining tax wars, the carbon price failures.
A graveyard of reforms.
Can a government, even one with a decent mandate, actually manage to execute dozens of these smaller, necessary, but still politically tricky changes all at the same time? That sheer complexity of execution, that feels like the biggest challenge now, doesn't it?
It really does. It demands a level of focus, executive discipline, and maybe political courage that, frankly, hasn't always been there during the easier years. Whether they can actually pull off that everything, everywhere, all at once economic transformation, well, we'll be watching very closely.
Thanks for listening. Follow us for daily insights into world affairs, and don't forget to like, comment, and share.